Hey everybody, this is Matt Gay from Operative. Thank you for logging into our webinar. We're trying something new type of series of webinars called Throwback Thursdays, and it's sort of one of my favorites because I love hearing the media industry talk about the media industry, right? People love to give quotes out and talk about what all the new and latest shiny objects in the industry. And then 6 months later, nobody ever goes back and reviews what they said. Was it true? Did it play out? All that kind of stuff. So this is going to be somewhat of a truth or dare sort of situation where we're going to take a webinar that we did last year around viewable impressions, and we've cut it up into different sound bites of different things that were said and projected and predicted. And we're going to take a look at those and see how we could refresh them. Did what we think was going to happen? Are the perspectives still holding true? All that good stuff. So today, along with me, we have Mitch Weinstein, who's the SVP of Ad Ops at Universal McCann, and we have Steve Sullivan, who's the Vice President of Advertising Technology over at the IAB. And we're going to go through, like I said, some of the clips from last year, and give sort of our perspective on what's happening. So you guys out there are all in listen-only mode right now. Feel free to post questions using the questions panel on your webinar panel. And we're going to be recording this session, and it'll be made available within about 48 hours on our blog. So without further ado, let's get going. So viewable impressions, right? Last year, it was it was when it started to really gain a bit of momentum, and I know there's been a lot of continued talk. So last year, Mike Leo, our president at the time, Manu Waraku, our chief product officer here at Operative, Julian Zildebrand from Starcom, and Kirby Winfield from ComScore got together and sort of debated and bantered around some of the different things that were going on with viewable impressions, at the time. So let's go through some of those clips, and I'm going to play a clip right now that talks about publishers and whether who's going to win and who's going to lose in this whole viewability game.
Great, and I guess it just kind of comes down to if you got non-viewable ads. You're probably on the tough side of this. Manu, from a publisher's point of view, how do you think people are thinking about who the winners and losers are in the space?
Right. So I think that Kirby said it right. I mean, anybody who's making money off of things that are not in view will lose. So there are lots of firms that might be in that kind of a business, but I'll leave that aside. But I think for publishers, the biggest thing has been that if you're not spending time thinking about how your inventory is performing in different channels, what type of inventory performs well in different channels, and what it's doing, then you're probably going to be on the losing end, because in view is going to sort of highlight a lot of shortcomings associated with the type of products you're offering in different marketplaces.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So, Mitch, Manu said that publishers will lose. Not that it might be some challenging, that they might have trouble dealing with it, but they're actually going to lose. Have you seen anybody lose yet?
I think it's too early to call winners and losers at this point. This is still something that's emerging. Not everyone's fully adopted it yet. I think you can predict, who will win in this case. The publishers and the networks that really embrace the concept of viewability. So you have some premium publishers out there right now that are focusing on this, that are putting out news that they will only sell or only deliver viewable impressions, both networks and publishers. But then you have other publishers who may not be grasping it or not getting onto it as quickly. People were saying when this first broke, maybe a couple of years ago, that the programmatic space is going to be affected the most and will come out looking not so good, because a lot of their impressions may not ever actually be in view if you buy on an exchange or through a DSP. But we're not seeing that yet. I mean, you're still seeing programmatic growth, month over month, year over year is growing tremendously. So it hasn't really impacted that yet. But I would say that any DSP or publisher or ad network really needs to focus on it and really get a handle on it and not ignore it, not hope it goes away, and not try to fight it. I would say embrace it, because if you fight it, you're going to, in that case, you will come out a loser.
Yep. So people have talked about, so there's viewable, and I think immediately people think that, below the fold means not viewable. But I think there's actually statistics out there. I think ComScore published some statistics that said that ads below the fold actually have higher engagement, sometimes than, ads above the fold, because if you're scrolling down, you're actually more engaged with the content, than maybe in the top. You might actually just scroll away to get down.
Sure.
So have you seen, or do you think that a lot of sites are actually going to need to reconfigure their sites, or is this about education? What do you think is going to help this, along for, Viewable to really, take hold?
Sure. I think you're seeing that already. A lot of sites will need to reconfigure, reposition where they put their ads. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the industry that will dictate that as well, like rising stars, different new formats, ad units, mobile versions of sites taking place. So you're seeing, people really work on reconfiguring their sites, but you don't necessarily have to. I mean, if you can approach an agency and say, look, we guarantee that all of our ads will be in view. You're not saying that all of your ads will be above the fold, below the fold, anywhere on the page. You're saying that they're only going to charge you for ads that are in view. And to your point, yeah, it could be more effective if you sell something below the fold. Yep. The issue is publishers in the past may have sold below the fold placements at a lower rate, not at a higher rate. Yep. So that whole balance of supply and demand and the course structure and the yield on those impressions will change, of course. Yep. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're selling only above the fold placements and that all of the ads have to be at the top of the page. They could be anywhere as long as you're looking at it from a viewable perspective.
Yep. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw a poll out to you guys, on the webinar, and it's around whether you've actually reconfigured, your site. So it's a yes/no question. Feel free to pick, either one. But have any of you publishers out there actually reconfigured your website, changed ad units, put ad units in, different places, than they have, than you had in the past, and really tried to take, a look at it. And while we're waiting for that, Mitch, let me ask you another question. There's a lot of talk about viewability, but I remember when I was at UM and we were working together, there's a lot of using the things around is the not just viewable, but was it ever actually shown? Was it shown in a safe environment? So is this about viewable, or is this ultimately around is the consumer getting the right experience from the advertisement itself?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think, the ad has to, obviously, you want it next to appropriate content, and, that gets into the whole verification thing. But when you're buying a viewable impression, yeah, you want to make sure that, in fact, it is seen and that you're getting what you're paying for. The issue is, to the early part of your question, is about the different vendors in the space. Yep. And, I mean, it's no secret. The MRC published a report showing that the viewability rates are all over the place. Sure. Like, there's huge discrepancies, and there's no consistency to those discrepancies. Yeah. So it's pretty wild right now, and not only the viewability rate, but the ability to view an ad through iframes. So in other words, can you determine if that ad is in fact in view or not? So getting past that threshold, there's even huge discrepancies. And the MRC has accredited a couple of companies in the space, and the issue is that there's no set standard methodology of measuring these things. So you have companies that are, in fact, MRC accredited, but there's still huge discrepancies between them.
That's right.
So the way we approach it is, when we set up a campaign, we'll go to our media partners, and we'll tell them in advance, look, this is the company we're using to measure viewability. Okay. We want to make sure they're on board with it, and we do allow a dialogue. Some people may say, look, this is it, take it or leave it. Yep. We try to have a dialogue, at least with our media partners, and say, look, this is who we're using. We want to make sure you're on board, and before we sign any IOs, let's get that piece nailed down. Like, we're going to measure viewability using this service, and we're going to look at the results and share them. I would say it doesn't necessarily mean that we're only paying for viewable impressions.
Right.
As an agency, we're not quite there yet. Some agencies might be doing that. We're not saying, look, we only want to pay for anything that's in view. What we're doing now is we're applying the viewability metric across many campaigns and seeing what the numbers look like.
Gotcha. Okay.
In some cases, we are saying to our media partner, we want a guarantee like 70%, 80%, 60%, whatever the particular case is, but we're not blanket saying everything needs to be 100% viewable or we're not paying.
We're not going to pay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We have a question about that later. Okay, so let's close the poll and share the results. So it looks like for the publishers that answered, most have not reconfigured the website to optimize for viewable impressions, and some actually have. I'm actually I know we have a certain sample size, but that's pretty interesting that 21% have actually gone out and reconfigured the website.
I'd be curious as to the ones that say no. How many of them are publishers versus ad networks?
Yes.
Right. We have probably some people from ad networks dialing in.
Yeah.
I'm not going to figure it out. But I'm curious. My curious nature. Right?
It's a follow-up. So here's a question that's come in to Universal McCann. That's you, Mitch. Do the campaigns that use viewability deliver better results?
Yes, they would, and they do.
Do they?
Yes.
You've seen that actually?
Yes, yes. Well, so what we get into is the whole concept of measuring view conversions based on viewability, right? So, and this is one of the things we talked about as well, in terms of using analytics and attribution modeling. We only want to look at that we're actually in view. That's right. So in some case, if you're looking at view conversions across the board, even whether those impressions were in view or not, yes, it may look better because some of those impressions were never seen, and you're driving more conversions because someone may not have seen it, but they were cookied, and then that person went and converted, but that ad had no effect. So in terms of performance, it's hard to say, but in terms of accuracy of our measurability, if we look at the number of impressions that were actually in view, and of those, how many then converted on the site, that's a much more accurate measure of a true view conversion. So many of our clients are skeptical about view conversions in general, and it's just for that reason, because an ad may never have been seen, but yet you're giving it credit for something that it didn't do.
The infamous and mysterious cookie bombing tactic.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's go to the next one. Okay, let's listen to it again. Back from about 10 months ago.
What do you guys think is the percentage of campaigns 12 months from now that are bought with this methodology?
I don't want to give a number, but I will say that, as Kirby mentioned, this is being done now,
dodging the question.
Right? Whether or not you're actually transacting on that is probably not the case simply because of all the points I made before, but it's being done now. I will say that, I'd be hard-pressed to tell you that a vast majority of typical branding campaigns and or DR campaigns wouldn't want to use this as the measurement simply because, again, it's going to provide uptick in performance any way you look at it. So I would say, without quoting a number, that it's going to be a vast majority of what's out in the marketplace.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So, I mean, Julian, was pretty, although he didn't give a, percentage, he was pretty strong about that's the way things are going to go. I mean, could you put a percentage on it, today? Roughly what percentage of the campaigns that you guys see have viewability in there somehow? If not how you're going to pay, but like you mentioned before, that you use it just to measure and to get some context and perspective. Like, so if you guys run, 100 campaigns a month, how many have a viewability component to it, and how have you seen that kind of trend over the past 6 months?
Sure. So I would say definitely upwards of 50%. I'll put a number against it, right?
Okay. We'll call Julian and let him know that you've thrown the gauntlet down. Okay.
So I would say definitely, a lot of our campaigns are tracking viewability. So a lot of our media already has a verification component to it, and the verification companies we're working with also have a viewability component. So it's easy for us to just add that right on to what we're currently getting.
Yep.
So I would say the majority of our campaigns do have a viewability component.
Okay.
How many of those are we actually billing on a viewable impression? Right now, none of them.
None.
None of them.
Not even one?
No.
Wow, okay.
No.
I thought you to recouple, maybe.
No, we're not. We're not at the point where, like I said before, we're not at the point where we could say we will only pay you for viewable impressions.
Yep.
We are looking at the data, and in some cases we're saying to our media partners, we want to see viewability above a certain rate, and if it's not at that threshold, this warrants a conversation. We need to know what's going on. Prior to that, we're upfront agreeing about which viewability vendor we're looking at and how the data is going to be looked at. I mean, this is, it's a new thing. We don't want to just start throwing it at people and saying, look, this is how we're doing it. But we do want to push it forward because we do feel it is an important metric and it's something we should be tracking and looking at. Okay. If you don't, like I said before, you're just going to get left behind. Yep. So you need to look at the stuff pretty carefully.
So now we need fodder for next year's webinar on this. A year from now, how many campaigns are going to be bought and sold on viewable impressions a year from now? We'll bring Julian back next year to comment on.
So you want a percentage?
Yes.
A year from now, let's say Q1 2014. I'll throw out a number. I'll say 25%.
25%. Steve, how about you?
I think that's a high actually, but not because I don't think we're going to be moving in that direction. I think that what we'll see at that point is more of what Mitch is talking about is happening today, and that is campaigns being having a percentage, being guaranteed on some percentage of viewability. I think we'll be heading that direction, but boy, 25. I'm a pessimist, so I'm going to say less.
Okay, less like 24% or less like 5%?
Less like 5, like let's say 7%. I was going to say 5 to 10. I'll give you a real number. 7%.
7%. All right, I'm writing that down.
I mean, I think you're going to see demand for this. This is becoming more and more relevant, and I do think you're going to see agencies and even agencies' clients start to really push this pretty hard throughout now and beginning of next year.
I mean, I find it hard to come up with an argument against if the ad, like if a tree falls in a woods, it'll make any noise. Like if an ad was never seen, right? How could it be effective in any way, shape, or form? And to date, I've yet to hear. We'll get into this a little bit later, but a real legitimate argument against why this doesn't work. So
right.
Okay, so now that this is happening, right, and we're going to play another clip, from last year when Manu talks a little bit about, so what should a publisher do? And it'll be interesting. We'll hear what he has to say. It'll be interesting to see whether some of those things have actually taken place over the over the past year. So here's Manu.
What should people be doing to make sure that they're not on the downside of this, but instead on the profit side?
Great. So I think a bunch of things. One is Julian mentioned if you're not paying attention to the 3MS process, then you're in trouble. So the first thing is pay attention to the 3MS process. What's happening there is important and follow it. It is something that is driving this, and it's a good thing for the industry. So pay attention to that. Number two is talk to your tech providers to make sure that they're thinking about it, right? We are certainly thinking about it as a technology provider for our publisher clients and working with our partners. But this is something that people need to be thinking about. And just as I talk to publishers, there's certainly clients of ours and publishers in general that I see behaving with VCPM or CPMV in mind and going ahead and doing campaigns that way. But that's sort of the extreme end, right? What most of them are focused on is on the most critical part of it, which is looking at their assets, looking at their products, looking at their website, and looking at how engagement or in view is present or not present. Where is it present? Where it's not present? Where are audiences where high in view versus likelihood to in view sort of relationship exists, right? There are certain engagement models in which things start off outside of view and then become in view. And so starting to look at how that engagement process works and getting smart about it is important for you to get ahead of it. And I think that I am seeing on our client base and certainly with publishers, they see it as an opportunity to differentiate themselves and get ahead of the marketplace in terms of proving value. So keep that in mind. Publishers, there are certainly a set of publishers who are seeing this as an opportunity to drive the market in their direction. And they see that as an opportunity. So we should be aware of that.
So Steve, Manu, if you're not involved with the 3MS project, or standards, you should be. There's a huge opportunity, a shameless plug for the IAB. Tell us about what the latest is. I think there's a press release recently. So what's the latest and how is evolved? Sorry, over the past 6 or 8 months.
So that obviously the release that you're referring to is the recent release of SafeFrame. When Mitch talked about the initial testing that was done by the 3MS effort and how viewability was all over the map, a lot of that being all over the map had to do with an inability to measure under certain circumstances, in particular when cross-domain iframes were in use. Now, most of us who know this industry understand that cross-domain iframes are used a lot, in some cases all the time, on certain sites. So SafeFrame represents an opportunity to present functionality to both the site and the vendor, either serving the ad or measuring its viewable state, to be able to do so from within that cross-domain iframe without having to pierce that boundary. So anyone who's curious about that, especially publishers, because we need publishers to adopt, you should go on over to iab.net/safeframe and have a look. But also any vendors, anyone who's measuring the viewable state of ads should also have a look at SafeFrame, because there are 2 components. What this represents is an opportunity for the MRC essentially to reboot some of this testing, to do some of the testing that we did previously again, but with partners who have the 2 components of SafeFrame installed, so that we can get a more realistic or more accurate picture of what the viewable rate is. Aside from that, things are essentially on track. I would say that the timeline may shift, it may fluctuate a little bit based on what we see. I think that that reality is starting to assert itself, and that's been that was brought up by Mitch earlier when he talked about the way that they're using Viewable today. I think that honestly is an interim step, not an interim step in the sense that we want people to use it that way, but an interim step in the sense that it's a natural progression from not having a product called Viewable to having a product called Viewable, is to first start measuring the viewable rate of the ads on the sites that you buy them from.
Hey Steve, I got
absolutely, yeah.
So part of the concern that I have regarding SafeFrames is just the adoption rate. So from you know a lot more about it technically than I do, but from what I understand, there's code or there's changes that need to happen on the publisher site to in order to accept SafeFrames. So a lot of the premium publishers, that should be fine. Anyone who actually controls their owned and operated. But when it comes to the networks, anything bought and sold in an RTB environment, it's harder to control what those sites do on their own back end in terms of their own coding in order to accept SafeFrames. So in order for SafeFrames to really work, it has to be adopted pretty widely, both premium sites and long tail sites. So I don't know if there's a plan or what your thoughts are on something like that.
Yeah, so that is one of the challenges. I'll say that that one of the things that that SafeFrame allows for is to have a third party issue essentially of your site. So our belief is that the long tail sites can take advantage of this, and and either have whoever their sell side ad server, or in some cases maybe even a verification services company, could actually render the SafeFrame ad on their behalf. Now that's definitely not something a premium publisher would want to do. They would want to control that, but that's one of the answers to the long tail issue that you described.
Okay. So I'll read a question from the audience, but in the meantime, I want to do another poll. So, do we think that CPMs are going to go, or CPMs going to go up when this happens, right? So there's a lot of debate about this, and there's a couple different sides, and the answer, of course, is always it depends. But I'll be curious to see what everybody else has to say out there.
I think the question is worded a little awkwardly. It says, will CPMs go up or down? Yes or no?
Oh. Yes is up, no is down.
Good. Everyone got that?
We're technology people. We're not English majors. So there's a question out there. Can you go up a little more? Sorry. There's a question that says, what is the where'd it go? There it is. What is the eCPM impact on viewable impressions? Aren't you paying the same amount for less scale? A publisher is not going to lose revenue on each page view, so we have to retain the displaced cost of non-viewable impressions. How would you respond to that as representing the buy side?
I would say, getting agencies to pay more is going to be tricky. There is the whole supply and demand issue, and if supply goes down, demand will go up, and that could, in theory, drive prices up. We haven't seen that yet.
Haven't seen what yet?
Prices go up.
Okay.
Or demand go down, or
or
supply go down, or anything like that. So the way I see it is, if you're a site and you are serving all of your impressions in a viewable way, the value of that media is going to increase. You're going to see a higher performance. You're going to see, whatever the KPIs are on the agency side, if they are brand list, awareness, selling more product in stores, conversion online, whatever it is, you're going to see metrics go up. So if you're a site and your ads are more effective, there's proof. Like, someone shouldn't necessarily pay more for an ad because it's in view or not in view. But if the ad itself performs better, and if you as a publisher or as a media partner are performing better for a particular client or a particular agency, you can certainly have that conversation and look at your rates in that way and see how that drives things.
It's always been amazing to me, right? We're all, for the most part, a lot of ops people and and revenue drivers and salespeople. But at the end of the day, these conversations always come back to content, be it the content of the publisher or the content of the ad. Because that's what the consumer is interested in, right? The consumer is interested in the content on your site or not, and the advertiser is interested in the consumer and the ad, because that's what will drive the consumer behavior that the advertiser wants. So it's always kind of fascinating because we spend 80% of our time talking about the process and viewable, not viewable, above the fold, below the fold, third-party reconciliation numbers, all these issues that are real. But at the end of the day, we spend very little time talking about the actual creative asset. And when I was at Martha Stewart, we would debate that all the time. We spend more time talking about ops, and then we would end up spending a lot of time with the editorial department just talking about the value of the content they were creating. And that will drive more consumer engagement, which will drive the other which will bring more advertisers there. So more of the same.
Yeah, no, I think all that is really important. And if you can get that formula down and still be able to drive performance from your media, then you might see prices increase.
Yep.
Hasn't happened yet.
No. So there's another question here. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I just want to point out that this does get back to what Mitch said about winners and losers. It's the people who are going to win are the sites who get out ahead of this and start doing exactly what you guys are describing, tying other kinds of performance to to viewable ads, and that's where the value becomes apparent to the buyer.
Yep. All right, so let's close our poll, and believe it or not, let me share the results. There are some people that CPMs, actually a lot of people, think that CPMs are going to go up with this. So good luck, right? And it could be, right? And it's one of those things where it could be driven because of viewable, but for all the things that you said that go along with viewable.
Absolutely.
So I think it's one of those things where it'll be interesting to see how some of this gets attributed or credited, whether it's to viewable or whether it's really about making your site a good place, a well-lit environment, for both consumers as well as publishers.
Right. Viewable isn't be all and end all. It's a means to make your media more effective.
That's exactly right. That's exactly.
So as long as your media is more effective, yeah. Yep.
Oh, there's one. So here's Lauren Brown, Operative's founder, and recently named CEO. And he actually sat down with Randy Rothenberg a few weeks ago, for an interview. And I wanted to play, a clip of that interview because I think it's relevant to to what we're talking about today here.
So clear is that if publishers or sellers of digital media are going to prepare for one thing, I think it's to invest in an infrastructure that enables them to sell by impression, right? And you're doing this today with the 3MS project, right? Where you're doing the viewable impressions, and that's designed to bring more brand dollars, not just to online, but to digital as a whole.
Yeah, I mean,
So let's talk about that. So in terms of video, I mean, are you starting to see, and do you think that viewable impressions, right? Because you run actually ops for digital as well as television, correct?
Yeah.
So are you starting to see, at least in the operations area, are you starting to see, some of the dollars coming from, quote unquote, from television, right? Whatever that means, over into the digital space. And do you think that this concept of viewable will make digital a quote unquote safer place for some of these advertisers, that know TV, they've been advertising on the TV medium for 40, 50, 60 years, and the digital is still considered a wild west. Do you think Viewable will help bring some of those dollars into the, onto the online publishers?
Yeah, I do. And like we were saying before, it's about the performance of the media. So it won't necessarily drive more dollars just because, hey, now your ads are in view.
That's right.
It's because the performance will increase, and we'll see that bear out in all the results. As far as video is concerned, we're not necessarily seeing clients cut their TV budgets and move that money or that budget into digital.
Yes.
TV budgets are still huge, and when you walk around I mean, most of the people that work there still work in TV. Digital is still not nearly as big as TV in terms of budgets and scale. But what we are seeing is clients start to take it more seriously and look at video in conjunction with their TV.
Yep.
So seeing video more as an extension of their TV buy, not an extension of their digital buy.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the demand right now is to be able to measure things in a similar way, which gets into the whole 3MS vision of having a common measurement, a common metric in some sort of GRP or something where you can measure your media from TV as well as in video.
Yep.
Nielsen's coming out with some products. ComScore has some, cross-screen products.
That's right.
It's a very important area because we want to be able to measure those things. And you're seeing companies like DG, MediaMind. I know they just went through a rebranding recently, where they are the back-end supplier of TV assets. They distribute commercial assets to all the broadcast stations. They have like 80% market share, and they're right now in the process of combining that with what they're doing with video to be able to measure everything in one place. That's just one example. So you definitely are seeing all these areas converge, but I don't necessarily think that cutting budgets here and putting it over there.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about supply and demand. And I love it when we relate, sort of proven techniques, or not proven techniques, proven concepts, sort of in the non-media world, the medium. And Manu goes through an interesting thing here on supply and demand, and he uses the word hyperbolic, which I of course had to look up exactly what that meant.
You know what I mean?
So it means just. Oh, you looked it up too. It means completely like out of skew or offline.
Thanks.
I was an engineer. I actually know these things. I know what the shape looks like. So let's listen to Manu.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about how publishers are feeling and the stress around this issue on this question, and then I'd love to get to Julian and.
Sure. Certainly stressed about it, right? In the sense that this is going to be a inventory problem, and they're going to have to solve. They have a certain business model that's been built up around the impression, and they understand how much money that they're going to be getting at it. And so this is going to cause a certain amount of disruption and change that they have to work through. Overall, I think that simply publishers I talk to don't sort of simplistically look at it and say, I'm going to lose 20% of my in-view impressions, or they're currently that are not in view, and therefore I need to make up that money in higher CPMs. It's a little more nuanced thinking on their part as to how this plays out, and they have levers available to them that they can use to sort of keep their revenue where it is. So concerned, because I think that the reaction is the CPM will stay exactly the same, but obviously, and they're going to get, and it's just going to be lower amount of things that they're getting paid for. However, there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen between now and then. We don't know as to exactly what the revenue equation fully looks like. Right. So the one thing I want to quickly comment on this was that I think that the notion of supply and demand has been talked about, but truly, and at the same time, people always think about endless impressions available. This sort of provides a true sort of mechanism to try to create some scarcity. And I think that from a pricing control point of view and sort of getting revenue up from point of view is really where some of the economics start making sense. You can't, publishing today is easy in the internet world, right? Anybody can put up a blog and say, I'm going to monetize it, and put a Google AdSense tag on it, and you're off and running. I'm being a little hyperbolic here, but in effect, that person is competing with, from a volume point of view, with an NBC or anybody else. So, in effect,
let's pause right there. So, you're talking about there's going to be scarcity, supply and demand. A little bit what we were, talking about. You said you haven't really seen that, so far, right? Do you, let's go back to the, the prediction, thing. Do you believe that over time that these sort of classic supply and demand metrics will actually begin to take over in the digital advertising space? Again, when I was back at Martha Stewart, we used to have, and I'm sure a lot of you publishers did as well, these endless debates about sell-through, right? We sold through, we not sold through. I'm like, we can fix sell-through immediately, take half the ad slots off your site, and now all of a sudden you're sold through. But did that actually solve your problem? It makes your CFO happy because we said we've sold through the site, but it actually didn't get you necessarily, any more money. That was one. The second thing was, our salespeople would always freak out whenever we were sold out in certain areas. I said, why don't we use that to our advantage? We're creating scarcity, right? Why don't we sell the fact that it's popular, it has sold out, so next year, if you have a seasonal business, or whatever the different demographics are of your site, you sell the fact that there is a limited amount of, of impressions. There is a limited time in which you can get in front of this audience. So do you think that viewability will begin to drive some of those classic supply chain supply and demand economics that you as a buyer or on the buy side are actually going to have to deal with and decide whether you're going to maybe even buy futures in some things because you know that they're going to be scarce?
Okay, you're talking futures now.
Oh yeah, this is big stuff.
So I think with you have to break it out into two buckets. I feel like you have premium publishers who do have control over their site and where they can put impressions and where they can put different media placements, and then you've got sort of the long tail that's bought in programmatic fashion through exchanges, where the service we're buying from doesn't necessarily have control over the actual inventory. So for the premium sites, like I was saying before, it's going to be about performance. So right, you could just decide to eliminate 90% of your placements and have one placement on a page at a time, and giving clients 100% share of voice, sell that at a premium, and that's completely possible. And agencies will pay more for that if it's valuable and if it works and if it performs and it moves the needle in the right direction. That's what it really all comes down to. It's not about am I paying for a 300 by 250 versus a 728 by 90. It's does this site perform? And we have paid, we have paid more for sites that perform well when we have a history of working with them and they do drive our business results. We will pay more for that because that's what we're after. But just by putting more placements on the site, that's not really gonna move anything. And to your point, if you have a 100% sell-through rate, that may look good, but at the end of the day, you really need to drive that revenue. So you really want to make your media more valuable.
Yep. So along those lines, here's a comment or question, from the audience. It says, how exactly does the math add up, with many question marks? If there are less ads billed for, CPMs have to go up in order to maintain the same page revenue. There are no levers to pull other than site redesign, which will not work for all publishers when it comes to content layout. Fair point. Right? I mean, not every site can be redesigned or what have you. But I'll take a crack at this. I'd like your perspective from the buy side as well. There are levers, right? It goes back to the creative, right? It goes back to how you're selling, how you're packaging your inventory, right? So this comes back to, Manu's comment about this isn't about always just putting up ads. But now we get into yield management. Now we get into inventory management, right? Who's buying what and where? And maybe you can increase the CPMs, or maybe you can package things differently that would appeal to a particular advertiser, to a buyer. So it's not just a linear problem or equation where either CPMs have to go up and or ad slots have to go up. It could be around the creative. It could be around the actual content that you have, which is attracting different audience, which would be more valuable to buyers, right? I would imagine. As well as looking at how you across your site and how your inventory is sold and presenting more creative packages, because as you just said, is if it's performing well, you're happy to pay more, so to speak, or within reason, right?
Yeah, I think as a publisher, it's not realistic to go to an agency client and say, hey, look, all of our ads are now in view, pay us more.
Yeah.
I don't see that conversation going very well. But if you can say, look, from now on, all of our ads are in view, we're going to guarantee lift in whatever metric you're looking at. There's value to that, right? The viewable impression itself is not the true value. It's the increase in performance associated with it, where you're eliminating all the chaff at the bottom that no one ever sees, and you focus on what is high quality and what works. That's where you might be able to drive up your rates. But initially, I would not. Everything's viewable. We're going to make more money. We're going to charge a higher rate. I don't think that's realistic.
I like that word chaff. It's sort of in the same genre as a hyperbolic.
Yeah, thank you.
Don't you think chaff, hyperbolic?
Thank you. I like it too.
Let's go to our next clip, and this is again.
That's a fair question.
Oh, it's a completely fair.
I don't. Did everyone see the question?
No, that's why I read.
There's like 25 question marks after it says, how does the math add up? There's lots of question marks. So I get that.
It is a good question, yeah. Let's see what.
The things that we see is, companies that have sold television, companies like Dish TV, for example, that have already converted their TV ad business to an impression-based model. I mean, that's a really interesting development, because you go from selling something on ratings points all of a sudden to something by impression. Well, then all of a sudden that becomes a currency that needs to be measured in some way, right? The other thing that's really interesting is companies like Time Warner, like Comcast, like Cablevision, and a lot of the programming companies have this idea of video on demand. And that's going to become this pretty cool bridge that gets a lot of those TV dollars to become digital dollars. And if you don't want to look at it that way, well, you can look at it as those TV dollars that are sold by ratings turning into impression dollars, right? They're not monetizing video on demand today, but they're talking about it, right?
Yeah,
So Steve, let's talk about this a little bit, right? So we're talking about, again, this whole thing about convergent television, video on demand, IPTV, all that kind of stuff. And I know that the IAB has been doing a lot of work. I was with Dan Murphy a couple weeks ago, around this discussion around the digital GRP. ComScore has a way of measuring this. Nielsen has a way of measuring this. What's your perspective on the way this cross-screen, measurements are beginning to evolve?
Well, naturally, yes, you're right. There are measurement companies out there that have essentially digital, what they're calling a digital GRP, and including Google. Google's got one now as well. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to sort of facilitate a market that can provide that, or that can be calculated by anybody. That it's not a requirement that everyone use just one vendor, or even one of 2 or 3 vendors. Now, even so, right? Even with that being the goal, we have to, we're looking realistically at what marketers need. And to be honest, for me, when we first started out on this 3MS journey, it was difficult for me to understand until I just put it in the context, in a very simple context of being a marketer and needing to know, needing to understand my campaign regardless of channel. So digital versus traditional, that shouldn't be an issue. It should just be all advertising. And when I make changes to one of those channels, what effect does it have on my marketing, on my campaign? And that's what we're really trying to get, is this ability for someone to measure that effect across their entire spend. And that's what the digital GRP is all about.
So Mitch, have you guys gotten involved in any of that yet? So on the buying side, you mentioned that they're still somewhat separate, but have you guys started to take a look at, when you guys are evaluating the performance of campaigns for your advertiser, have you started, how are you guys beginning to, reconcile across screens?
Sure. So in many cases on our video buys, we're using Nielsen's OCR product or ComScore's, BCE product as well. The idea is that we're able to measure the audience that saw the ad. So we're able to see basically agent gender, which is how it's measured in TV. So we're able to look at, of our videos, what percentage of them hit the right audience using a metric like OCR, which is, maybe it's not the best out there, but it's widely accepted, and it has the Nielsen brand on it,
Yep.
which always helps when it comes to measuring things, right? Yeah, that's pretty valuable. So we are looking at that, and in some cases, that's something we are holding some of our media partners accountable for in terms of guarantees, where we're saying we want to make sure that a certain percentage of all of our impressions lands within the right audience. Yep. Based on Nielsen OCR, and we're going to evaluate the performance of the campaign, and we're going to only pay on a certain percentage within that metric. Yep. So that's something we look at pretty closely, and we're very upfront with our media partners. Like, they know this upfront, they agree to it. It's all worked out in advance. It's not something we're just throwing at them.
All right. So let's. I'm gonna launch another poll, and then I want to, Steve, I'm gonna ask you a question, around some of these. So we've talked about all these different companies that are doing things. So let's take a look at which for the publishers or agencies out there, which viewable impression service are you using today? Are you using ComScore, using RealView, Double Verify? Those are sort of the big ones that we pulled out, or are you using another one? And in the meantime, Steve, there's a question from the audience that I wanted to read to you. It's kind of a long one. So this particular publisher has performed expansive viewability tests within several vendors in the space, and have seen vastly different results with each. And add to that the one-off in-view reports that they receive from agencies, that's you, Mitch, pertaining to their specific campaign, which also offer no consistency in terms of viewability metric. It's maddening. Given the current lack of standardization and counting methodologies, what's the benefit of publisher partnering with a viewability vendor beyond being able to engage in the always fun argument of our in-view percentage versus your in-view percentage, right? Is this first party and third party, all over again? So Steve, what's your take on, where we're at with all these different measurement companies? We've got a lot of them.
Yeah. So there's a fundamental thing to keep in mind, and that is that that you really have 2 classes right now of companies that do measurement. One is a class that has been audited by somebody. We prefer the Media Rating Council just because they have a very thorough and strict audit, but it doesn't matter who. A company that's been audited is in one class, and everyone else is in another. Now, here's why that is the case. Yes, what this person's question is getting at is that even among the audited companies, there are differences still, because we have not finalized exactly what constitutes a viewable impression. We're close, but we haven't finalized it yet. So each of the audited organizations does it a little bit differently, and they also have different capabilities with regard to measuring into or outside of cross-domain iframes. The result are differences in counts. But here's the important thing to keep in mind. You can only really understand what those differences are and why they exist when you're comparing audited companies to audited companies. If you can't compare audited companies to non-audited companies, because a non-audited company has had nobody looking at what they do to sort of to provide any third-party insight into what might be going on. Whereas all of the organizations that have been audited at least have had that, and at least there's, they have done some things like created a document of methodology that explains very carefully how they do what they do and what their limitations are. And it's only in those cases that you can do any kind of comparison. So I would recommend that. I mean, I agree that to some extent it's madness, but that's changing. We have 3 companies that are audited, and we have I believe 12 more in the pipeline. So we're getting there. But for now, do that comparison between apples and apples.
Mitch, you have a thought?
Yes.
I'm going to show the poll results.
I would just say from from my personal perspective, if we're working with a publisher and they come to us and say, look, we will measure viewability, that's not an issue. We prefer to use ComScore versus AdSafe versus Double Verify, whoever. That's okay. I mean, we would accept that. I wouldn't have an issue with that. If they said, look, we've already got a back-end integration, we've got a partnership with this company, we prefer to use them, that's fine. I don't think we'd have an issue with that. The point is that we're all looking at it and trying to make sense of the data. Good. And just on this poll, I would have added
no, go ahead.
I would have added AdSafe to that as well. They're a big player in the space.
Maybe they're.
That's probably a lot of that 53%. Yeah.
Okay. So let's. We're getting towards the end here, and there are still some some questions out there. So I'm sorry we weren't able to get to everybody's questions. But what I would encourage you to do is please contact us. And this is good news, because then probably this would be a good idea to maybe have even another webinar, maybe even to dig into some of the depths of things. But let's I'll ask each of you guys this as we sort of close, and I'm going to put up a poll while you guys are discussing it. But what are the pros and cons? Like, let's just in very, very simple terms, what do you see as the pros of of moving towards viewable, and the cons? Because remember, for publishers, it's going to be a fair amount of work, right? It's going to be a fair amount of work, if not potentially changing their site. Certainly, they have to do a lot more analytics and thinking about it. They might have to change editorial. It's a fair amount of work for them. So, what do you think about the pros and the cons?
So we always talk about bringing more branding dollars into online. Online is digital is too DR focused. It's focused on the quick conversion. This is a way of doing that. Of like I said before, the viewable impression is in itself that important, but it's a means to increasing performance of the media. So if we want to truly grow the digital media world, this is a great way to do it, to focus on what people can actually see, rather than have these back alleys where you're serving tons of impressions that are never being seen. That's ridiculous. If we have a way of measuring that and achieving that, we should absolutely 100% focus on it.
Yep, that's right. And that's something that again, over the years, I mean, I was relatively new to the media business when I joined Martha Stewart, and not having all the background of digital, where things have come over the prior 10 years, it had always been kind of amazing to me how a lot of people were actually making money, on impressions on online media. So I feel like that the viewable impressions, although we've talked about it, it's not going to be the reason, but it's certainly a huge catalyst, I think, that will take online or digital media to sort of the next level in terms of maturity, because it's really going to turn into being about engagement, about performance, right? It'll be good for, I think it's going to be frankly good for everybody, right? I think it's going to be good for the publisher, because I do actually believe that it ultimately will increase their revenue. I don't know if CPMs are going to go up or down, but I believe that will actually increase the revenue for good publishers that have quality editorial and are running quality ads. It's good for the agency because you don't have to weed through what is and what isn't. It's good for the consumer, the person that's using the website, because they're going to have a lot probably less cluttered space. And it's good for the advertiser. At the end of the day, we're all out of business if the advertiser isn't happy.
Right. At the end of the day, our clients don't care about iframes, face frames.
Yes.
They don't care about
all that crap.
they don't
That's right.
care about pixel bounty. They want performance. They want to see their ads work, and we know they work. We just have to be able to increase that and show that and prove it.
Steve, final thoughts, and then I'm going to show the interesting results of this final poll because they are pretty interesting, actually.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more. It does ultimately equate to a transition of the advertising industry from something analog to something digital. This is a step we have to take to make it happen. That means ultimately more dollars. The other thing is, I do want to reiterate that we're missing, that there's a whole class of inventory out there. You hinted at it, Matt, when you said quality. We have to have a way to sort of differentiate quality in opaque environments such as RTV environments. Otherwise, this will not benefit them. It will if we do, but it won't if we don't achieve that. So I just wanted to point that out.
Good point. All right, so here's the results of our final poll. %63% think viewable impressions are going to be good for the publisher, and 40% actually think it's going to be bad. That's pretty surprising to me, anyway. I would have thought that it would have been more yes than no, but I guess more of an optimist.
Maybe I'm pleasantly surprised. I think the fact that we'll call it 60-40 split, right?
Yes, that's good.
60% of people on the call, I'm assuming it's a nice broad range of premium publishers, ad networks, ad tech people. That 60% think it's a good thing.
Yeah, okay.
That's great. That's encouraging to me. I'm a glass half full kind of guy, right?
All right. Well, with that, I just want to thank everybody on the line for joining. Just about everybody stayed through to the end, which is terrific. Mitch, thank you for your time and for your insights. Steve as well from the IAB, thank you for coming along and lending your perspective on things.
Thank you, Matt.
I guess you bet. This will be posted on our site, the op-ed, and we'll be following also up with with an email. And also, please feel free to reach out to me or Steve or Mitch with some of the questions we didn't get to, or to continue the dialogue. So, thanks everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks for everyone for sticking by.